Well, usually starting with a funny story or something, but I'm not going to tonight because of the joy and the importance of what we're going to talk about. Years ago, we didn't do that the last few years of the Bible Institute, but I guess for the first probably 20, 25 years, we had this little ceremony in the Bible Institute. Right before graduation, right before we marched across the stage to get our diplomas, I met in a little room with Dr. Chapman and several of the rest of those that taught, and we had a little ceremony, and we prayed for the students. But then I remember saying, basically it was the same each year. Now for the last 2 years, because the Bible Institute was a program of 2 years, I said, we have taught everything that we know how to teach you concerning salvation, and concerning what the Bible says about the deity of Jesus, the inspiration of the Scriptures, etc. And now you're leaving Mother Church, and you're going out, because back then most of them were members of Thomas Road, and you're going out and you'll be facing a world on its way to hell. And because of the time and prayer, and some of you the mercy that we've shown you during these last 2 years, we demand, not suggest, we demand that you go out there to that world on its way to hell and give them heaven. Now, I'd like to give you a little heaven tonight. I have an idea that probably the world, the flesh, the devil's been giving a little last week, and if so, not to worry, you'll get it next week. There's a lot of confusion about heaven. Many theologians say, well, I think it's unwise to speculate regarding a sky-high heaven or a red-hot hell, or to talk about the temperature of hell and the furniture of heaven. In fact, one theologian, Dr. Preston Bradley, never forget the name. When I was a student at Moody Bible Institute, he was an infidel and an in-for-hell theologian. He had a big radio program, though. And one Easter Sunday afternoon, I was working as a soda jerk right across a little drugstore right across from the Moody Bible Institute. And I turned the radio on and listened to him. He had a radio program. And he said, now he was going to speak about the afterlife. I said, oh, I didn't think you believed that. But he said, I no longer believe, and he used that expression, a red-hot hell or a sky-high heaven. He said, to me, he said, heaven and hell are terms of swinging doors, like the old saloon, you go in and then you go out. And he said, for example, he said, I think, and then he gave this illustration. He said, I think that both heaven and hell are only experienced here on earth. And he gave this illustration. Here is, he called him Bob, I think, and he's an employee at this business. And he's been there for about 25, 30 years. And he's in his 60s, so he's about ready to retire. But he's got a couple more years to get his financial picture what it should be. And one Monday morning, without any warning, the branch manager, it's a national company, comes in and says, Bob, he said, I got some bad news. I don't know how to tell you. I'll just blurt it out. He said, you know, we've had a cash flow problem lately, and Bob knew that. He said, so we've done some cutting, and I hate to tell you this, you're a faithful worker in all these years, but this will be your last week. I'm going to terminate your job. Well, he's devastated, and so he just can't do anything for an hour. He just sits and thinks and said, what on earth? I'm too old to get another job. I need a couple more years here. And what will my wife say? Well, somehow he got through that day and he went home and his wife wasn't there. And there was a note on the kitchen table. And the note said, no, there's no other person involved. But I guess, as the young people would say, I want my space. I want out of the marriage. I'm gone. I'm out of here. Well, I mean, if he felt bad, you can imagine how he felt then. He's lost his job and his wife. What else could go wrong? And the phone rings. And he picks it up, and the voice says, now we need to take, this is Dr. Such and Such, we need to take some more tests. But I need to tell you right now, it looks very serious. What you have, it may be fatal. Well, his whole world has come to an end. Almost, it seems. He's lost his job, his wife, and now maybe his life. Well, somehow the poor guy struggles through till Friday afternoon. And he's cleaning out his desk. And suddenly the door opens and the branch manager comes in with the big guy himself, the owner from Chicago. And he introduces himself and he says, we've never met, but he said, I know about you, your faithfulness, etc. And he said, Bob, he said, I'm so sorry we put you through this week, and it must have been very difficult, but we do have a cash flow problem, but we're working it out. We have to have you. Please stay. And if you stay, I'll guarantee you can stay as long as you want, and we'll give you a raise. Well, he's feeling a little better, but there's still the wife and the health problem. And so he goes home, and his wife is there. And she meets him at the door and puts her arms around him and said, look, she said, we got some problems, but I've had time to think it over. And she said, I love you, and I know you love me. I'm here for the duration. Let's make this thing work out. Well, he said, he's feeling much better. The phone rings, and the doctor said, great story to tell you. He said, we've done some work here, and you do have a problem. We can take care of it. No problem. Well, he said, the beginning of that week, when you go through that, that's hell. But then it turns around, and that's heaven. So his conclusion was, the only heaven, the only hell that a person receives, they receive here on planet Earth. Now I want to tell you something. From a theological perspective, in one sense of the word, I agree. This world is the only hell and the only heaven that people experience. Let me explain that. Many years ago, I was flying back from L.A. to Chicago, and I'd read everything on the plane. I don't like flying anyway, and I did all the work in my briefcase, etc. But I was trying to go to sleep, and I was hard ready to go to sleep. And I looked down, and there was Ladies' Home Journal magazine. I said, "Well, I'm not that desperate." And so, but then there was a. No offense, ladies, but there was another. It was a magazine, Business Review magazine. This was in December, so it was at the end of the year, and so I said, "Good." I said, "This thing will be so dull." He said that it'll put me to sleep, and so I began to read it. Well, I got interested in an article about the Playboy empire, and that made me very upset because there were no pictures. This is okay. This magazine guy, come on. But according to this December article, that the Playboy empire that year, this was in the 80s, I think, when a dollar was a dollar, had grossed $500 million. And that Hugh Hefner, the owner, had netted $50 million. Did you ever get mad at God? Well, I was mad, but I was upset. And I said, $50 million for this guy. And I said, God, he hates you. Some time ago, I think it was Hugh Hefner, either that or one of these porno kings, was asked by the reporters, what's been your goal? What is your goal in life? And they replied, I think it was Hefner, he said, well, boys, he said, there was a guy in history that invented the seventh commandment. And he said, I'd like to be known as the guy that circumvented the seventh commandment. Well, that was adultery. And he didn't invent that at all. Moses didn't. God invented that. But so I thought, dear Lord, I'm sure you're a good mathematician also. That's almost $1 million a week. Think of how many Bibles that would publish. Think of how many missionaries that would support. Think of how many orphans that would take care of. It's not fair. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, well, maybe it's not quite as unfair as I had first imagined. Now, Hugh Hefner, the old guy, is still hanging in there. I'm 81, he's 84, and he just married his sixth wife, I guess. And he's had what he calls lays. He's had probably a dozen. And this one is 21 years old, so they're about the same. Great-great-grandfather. I don't know. I wouldn't even want to know what's going on in that bedroom. But at any rate, I'm sure he wouldn't ask me, but if we'd ever meet, and he would say, I got a few more years left, not many, but I'd like to, now to get older and looking back now, I'm asking various people from various walks of life how you would suggest that I live the last few years of my life. And knowing what I know about him, I think I might be tempted to use the shock treatment. I said, okay, Hugh, let me just tell you something. How am I as evangelical telling you to live the rest of your life, the last few years? I would say, Hugh, baby, just keep on doing what you're doing. The Playboy philosophy is the right philosophy. If it feels good, do it, and do it again. But Hugh, let me tell you something. Get all the kicks you can for the next 2 years, because this world is the only heaven you'll ever know. Did you know that? The only heaven the unsaved person will ever know. And, of course, there's another side to the coin. Years ago, a lady asked me, she said, I just can't understand the way God treats me. And I said, well, why? What do you mean? She said, I feel, and I do too at times, I feel like I'm a little bird, and I'm in a cage, and I'm helpless, and I can't get out. And the world, the flesh, the devil, they come along, and they poke me, and why does God allow that? And I answered, I said, why not? God is going to allow, and by the way, Psalm 103, he knows how much we can bear. And I said, God is going to allow us to be beat up on occasion when we don't deserve it, because, sister, this world is the only hell that the believer will ever experience. The only heaven the unsaved will ever know. The only hell the child of God will ever experience. Now, the introduction, false views about heaven and categories of heaven. Actually, there are 4 heavens mentioned in the Scriptures. Now, in the Muslim world and the Quran, etc., there are 7 heavens, and we caught up in the 7th heaven. But in the Bible, there are 4. In fact, the first verse in the Bible is in the plural. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we're familiar with these. The first heaven is found in Daniel and Matthew. You have the references there. And where these men both talk about the fowls of the heavens, the birds of the heavens. That's the atmospheric heaven. That's the heaven of as I say, the birds in the clouds. But that's not the heaven we're going to talk about tonight. Now, there's a second heaven, and David described that heaven in Psalm 19. And I can just imagine some 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, about 1,000 BC, that he's out watching his father's sheep in the hills of overlooking Bethlehem, and he looks up in the Mideastern sky, and he sees the North Star and the Milky Way, etc., and he exclaims, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Well, now David was talking about the second heaven. That's the home of the sun and moon and stars. And by the way, something extremely important, sort of a turn in human history, happened the day before Christmas, December 24th, 1968. Now, if you're in the 60s or 70s, you'll remember this. You're probably doing, well, I'm sure you were doing exactly what my wife and I and my parents, it was Christmas time, we were had gone home to be with them. We were huddled around a black and white television set. We were watching Walter Cronkite as he described the first probe to the moon. And you remember the first Apollo, it was there was 3 men, Lovell, Andrews, and Borman. And on that occasion, they landed on the moon, 3 others the next year, July 20, 1969. But in 1968, they reached the moon. It took them a couple of days to get there. They circled it 3 times, and they came back to Earth. Now, that was historically important, not just because we'd reached the moon, but it was the first time in human history where, in this case, 3 men left the first heaven and made their way into the second heaven. Never happened before. And let me just say this, though. If Jesus tarries 1,000 years, and I'm confident he will not, there will never be a spacecraft to take you to the 3rd or the 4th heaven. Because Jesus told Nicodemus, fella, unless you're born again, you can't see those heavens. Okay, so that's now the 3rd heaven. I believe, is the present heaven, a temporary heaven. By the way, there's a temporary hell and a temporary heaven. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2, Paul said on one occasion, I was caught up beyond the first, the atmospheric, beyond the second, outer space, into the third heaven. And there I saw and heard things so glorious I couldn't even write about it. Now, as I understand, that's the present home of God and the holy angels. And I think that was the heaven that Paul had in mind when he said, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord in the third heaven. But really, that's not the heaven I'm going to talk about tonight either. And the fourth heaven is mentioned in 2 Peter 3 and Revelation 21:1. And that heaven, I'll have a lot more to say about that, has to do with the heavenly city, New Jerusalem. Okay, so that's the categories of heaven, 4 heavens. And the capital of heaven, a literal city. If we can think of it from this point on, it's no beautiful isle of nowhere where people sit around strumming guitars, if you're from the South, or violins or whatever. But it's a literal city, and we'll see all the description of it at the end of the page there. But this city was it's not just a New Testament doctrine. It was anticipated in the Old Testament. For example, 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years before Christ was born, Abraham, the Bible said in the book of Hebrews, he looked for a city with foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He looked for a city, not Ur of the Chaldees, not Beersheba, and not Hebron and some of the other. He looked for a city that had foundations. 2000 BC, Abraham and the patriarchs were looking for that city. And then fast forward another 1,000 years, and it's 1000 BC. And David is in the Oval Office, and he's thinking apparently about that same city that Abraham had anticipated. And in Psalm 46, verse 4, he writes these words. He said, there is a river, the streams whereof make glad the city of God. He's not talking about Jerusalem. He's talking about a river. There's no river ever associated with the city of Jerusalem. In fact, the closest river is about 20 miles east, and it's the Jordan River. He's looking for the same city that Abraham had looked for. And then in Psalm 87, verse 3, he said, glorious things are spoken of the Zion city of our God. So this city is anticipated in the Old Testament. Then you come to the gospel accounts, and right before our Lord was crucified, in John chapter 14, he promised to go build that city. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. So what's Jesus been doing the last 2,000 years? Several things. Number one, he's making intercession for us, but also he's building that city that Abraham and David had looked forward to. So anticipated in the Old Testament, promised in the Gospels, it's referred to in the epistles, and in the book of Hebrews especially, Hebrews 12, verse 22, the author says, the city of the living God and an innumerable company of angels. And then I love the passage in Hebrews 13, verse 14, where the author says, for here we have no continuing or lasting city, but we seek one to come. I was honored this graduation by opening the ceremony in prayer, and I prayed that God would impress upon these thousands of graduates that when they go out, keep in mind, we are never described as homesteaders, but as pilgrims. There is a difference. A homesteader, they find a place and they settle down and build a fence and a home and they stay there. But we're traveling through. This world is not our home. We're just passing through. So we have no lasting city down here, no eternal city, but we look for one. We are pilgrims and not homesteaders. And referred to in the epistles, but it is not until you come to the next to the last chapter in the New Testament, in the Bible, that we find this city anticipated in the Old Testament, promised in the Gospels, referred to in the epistles, now described by an eyewitness account, John the Apostle. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And I, John, saw a new heaven, the holy city of God. I think it was in the 70s that my wife and I and my mother-in-law, we took our first trip to England. And so it was the month of June. We went over there for a couple of weeks, and I wanted to get back as soon as I could because there was a rumor over there Dr. Fowle had made a down payment on the state of Virginia. I wanted to find out if that were true or not. So we got in one of those 707s at Heathrow Airport. And look, a cigar there. They don't have these anymore, the 707 planes. But we flew nonstop across the pond, arrived at New York City, which is a foreign country. You know, we'd been one foreign country and another foreign country, I guess. And then we went through customs. And now my wife said, "Now, husband," she said, "I know you're anxious to get back to Lynchburg." And I said, "Yes." She said, "But now, you know, Mom lives in Ventura, California, and her plane leaves tomorrow, and I'm going to stay tonight, and if you don't mind, and so we'll make sure that she gets in the right plane at the right time." I said, "No problem." So I got those gals in a motel, and then about 10 o'clock at night, I got aboard one of those, back then, those air scares, the little 737 Piedmont puddle jumpers, and for Lynchburg. Well, we got airborne. It was a beautiful night, one of the rare nights in New York City where there wasn't pollution or fog or anything like that. And then something happened that never happened before, at least to me, and never happened again. We got about 5,000 feet airborne, and we went into a holding pattern. And for a half hour, we just circled New York City. And I never did know why. I thought it can't be a traffic back up at Lynchburg, you know. We got 3 Piper Cubs coming in, and so could be that. Well, finally, I guess I don't know, the flight engineer said, "Well, let's see. No, I think it's this way." So then we took off for Lynchburg, and we had a very, normal trip back. But all the way back, I couldn't get over what I had seen. I was in a window there. There was, I think it seats about probably the plane, the 737, about 50 or 60, and there was only a half a dozen of us, so you could sit where you wanted to. And I watched, as the plane circled and everything, and I saw the 5 boroughs there the first time. And I'd flown in and out of the city of New York back then many times, but I'd never seen it the way I saw it that night. It looked like it was Christmas Eve. Millions of lights, I couldn't get over it, and it almost seemed like the Milky Way had dropped down and positioned itself between the East River and the Hudson River. And I thought, there it is, down there. That's the Big A, Big Apple. Well, there's some worms in that apple. That's Fun City. Well, it's not much fun now with all the crime, etc. And I thought, on the way back, my gracious, if sinful man can build a beautiful city like that, at least from the air, in a short amount of time that will fade away in an equally short amount of time, what can the eternal architect of the earth build? What kind of a city? And my thoughts went from the big A to the new J. Heavenly city, New Jerusalem. It's in the form of a city. Now, what do we know about this city? Well, we know something about the shape. It says that the length and the height and the breadth are the same. So it could be a cube. And some believe it'll be a cube like the Holy of Holies was a cube, 20 by 20 by 20. Or a pyramid. And a pyramid has a 4-square base. And you have the apex, that would be the glory of God, and it would trickle down glory. And Dr. Javer McGee, though, he said, no, friends, he said, I think it'll be like all the other bodily heavenly bodies. It'll be a globe, and with the 12 foundations and the light coming through, it'll be absolutely incredible. And I don't care if it's pretzel shaped, but the shape is the breadth and the height and the length are the same. The size, we take these figures literally, and I do. It'll be some 1,400 miles long, 1,400 miles wide, 1,400 miles high. Now, that's the cubic number of miles. And if you multiply 1,400 times 1,400 times 1,400, you get about 3.5 billion cubic miles, which is 14 times the size or the space that's surrounding the entire earth, water and earth. An incredible city. I wish that I would have had the chance to talk to the late Robert Ripley. Never met him, of course, and we're all familiar with Believe It or Not by Ripley. And he was an agnostic, and I don't know if he had cancer the last couple of years of his life, but he became very bitter, and he ridiculed God. He hated God. He made fun of God. And I think one of the last, he used to draw those cartoons himself, and then, of course, he hired others, like Walt Disney did. And but I think the last one, supposedly, that he drew before he died, I cut it out of the newspaper, and I had it in my Bible for quite a while. I think I lost it. It said, planning to go to heaven? Forget it. It's all filled up. I thought, wow. So he took those numbers and sort of, maneuvered them and did some crazy thing, twisted them. But he came to the conclusion that if everybody went to heaven that planned to go to heaven, it was all filled up about the time of the Protestant Reformation. Now, do you know his problem? I was listening to Billy Graham Classic the other night, and George Beverly Shea answered that question, or refuted what he said about it all filled up when he sung that beautiful song, "There's room at the cross for you. Though millions have come, there's still room for one." And if you're here tonight as that one, we'll scoot over a little. There's still room for one. There's room at the cross for you. And so that's the size. And then the foundations, 12 incredible foundations surrounding and are somehow associated with this heaven. And then the wall made of jasper. The wall is 216 feet high. Now, an architect will say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. You have a 1,500 or 1,400 mile high wall and our building and encompassed with a 216 foot curb like. That would be like placing a 2-inch curb around the Empire State Building. So it's not for protection. It must have been for beauty, etc. But the wall is made of jasper. The main street, a transparent gold. The buildings, according to Psalm 45, seems to be made of ivory. And the songwriter, of course, used Psalm 45 and as he wrote that beautiful song, "Out of the ivory palaces into a world of woe." That's the building. And the gates, 12 gates. I remember Dr. Fall used to say, I heard him on several occasions, that, of course, the gates are all made of pearl. And he said, this, I'll meet you at the eastern gate. He said, I won't be there. Wow. He said, there'll be 3 on the east, 3 on the west, 3 on the north, 3 on the south. He said, don't look for me at the eastern gate. He said, I'll be at one of those southern gates. Well, all these gates will be made of a solid pearl. Now, Dr. McGee has an incredible thought about this, and he said, I think the pearl, not the gold or the other precious metals there, he said the pearl seems to be the coat of arms at our heavenly city, because everywhere we turn, east, west, north, south, there's a pearl. And he said, I think that's no accident. And he said, one of the reasons a pearl is different from all other gems and precious metals on earth in that it is a product of water. And water in the Bible often is a type of Gentile people. But he said it's a part of a living organism. It's produced by a living organism. He said, now you could go to Africa, South Africa, and maybe get permission to go down and dig. You probably couldn't get it. In the cave for a diamond, you might find a diamond. You wouldn't find a pearl. And you go to Colorado and pan for gold. You might find some gold. You wouldn't find a pearl. A pearl is made by a living organism, an oyster. Not a synthetic pearl, a real one. And he said, this is what happens. An oyster gets a grain of sand in its side, and it's upset. It's hurting because of this grain of sand. So instead of dispelling it, it simply wraps it around with its own substance, layer upon layer, and finally a beautiful pearl is found, is produced. And he said, I think that will remind us that we were once a dirty little grain of sand in the sight of God. But God so loved the world, rather than expelling us to hell, he gave us a chance to be surrounded by his love and everything, and we are the product of this pearl. That's what the Bible says, and at least it gives us an indication in Ephesians 2, that in the ages to come, he might show we are trophies of the grace of God. And so the shape, the size, the foundation, the wall, the main street, the buildings, the gates, the throne. It's very important, the throne. It's mentioned a number of times by Daniel and by John. And at first we have the Father seated on the throne. And then as the Father gives the authority to the Lord Jesus, and you find that in Daniel chapter 7 and other passages, then the Lord Jesus is now the throne of his Father. And then a river. There's a river of life. And the tree of life. I remember when I first heard about the ministry down here, I kept confusing that with Charles E. Fuller's the old-fashioned revival hour with our ministry here, the old-time gospel. But Dr. Falwell, of course, Dr. Fuller was one of his heroes, and he took his name from the program there, etc. And I remember Dr. Fuller, I got it here, he came to Moody Memorial Church to speak at a conference, and I heard him there. It was jam-packed, and they had the old-fashioned revival hour, Rudy Atwood. Some of you older folks will remember that. And his favorite song, he said, now I want us to sing this song. And he said, and I'm going to sing the last stanza just to make sure that we get it right. And I'd never heard of it before, but it's a song by Henrietta Blair. And it has to do with this tree of life. He said, it's my favorite song. And the words are just marvelous. I just want to read them to you. The name of the song is Meet Me There. And here's what it is. On that happy golden shore, where the faithful part no more, when the storms of life is o'er, meet me there. Where the night dissolves away into pure and perfect day, I'm going home to stay, meet me there. The second stanza, here, how true this is, here our fondest hopes are vain, dearest links are rent in twain, but in heaven no throb of pain, meet me there, by the river sparkling bright, in the city of delight, when our faith is lost in sight, meet me there. Now, he said, friends, here's the third, and he sang this song, where the harps of angels ring, and the blessed forever sing, in the palace of the King, meet me there, where in sweet communion blend, heart with heart and friend with friend, in a world that ne'er shall end. Meet me there. Then we all sang the chorus, meet me there, where the tree of life is blooming, meet me there, when the storms of life are o'er, on that happy golden shore, where the faithful part no more, meet me there. They don't write songs like that anymore. The river and the tree of life. Then the second sheet, the challenges in heaven. Well, heaven will be a place of singing. We said often down here, we sing songs, we used to in the songbooks anyway, that we will not sing in heaven. We won't sing when we all get to heaven. We won't sing Sweet Hour of Prayer. But some of the songs we sing down here, I think we definitely will sing up there. I think we'll sing the Baptist National Anthem or the Christian National Anthem, Amazing Grace, and All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name. I think we'll sing one of my favorite, Not Have I Gotten But What I Received. Grace has bestowed it since I have believed. Boasting excluded, pride I base. I'm only a sinner saved by grace. This is my story, to God be the glory. I'm only a sinner saved by grace. Singing. And it'll be a place of fellowship. Someone said fellowship is two fellers in a ship. But we have so little fellowship down here for all the students. My wife has a far better memory than I do. She can have a class of 80 or 90. At about the third or fourth week, she knows all their names. She goes around and pats them on the head. And sometimes I forget my own name. And I've just finished teaching last semester 85 18-year-old kids. And I try my best to memorize many of them. But a place of and sometimes they would come to my office and tell. I said, I had no idea that was your background, that you're facing these problems. You know, my mother's dying of cancer. Real fellowship. Do you know, for example, in this book here, the Bible, there are nearly 4,000 characters, and some of them real characters, like Jacob in the Old Testament, Simon Peter in the New Testament, and Harold Wilmington. You can add your name there. But there are 4,000 people. And there, would you know, I'm sure this will shake your entire life, there are 32 Zacharias, different Zacharias, 32 named Zachariah. We know nothing about 30 of them. The two, one was a priest and one was a prophet, but we don't know anything about the others, except they were men, or they're being born babies. Did they die in childbirth? Probably not. They were named. Were they saved? They married? What kind of lives did they live? So in addition to all the other born again, we'll meet those 4,000 or however, look for Judas, that fellowship just in the Bible alone. It'll be a place of fellowship. And then it'll be a place of service. Now, I don't know exactly how we will work this out, but in Revelation 7 and in Revelation 22, it says, his servants shall serve him. I think I have a hint on this. In Genesis, about service and what we will do, in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, when God created Adam and Eve, and the first command was this, be fruitful and multiply, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowls of the air. It was God made a take charge individual, and he gave him a take charge wife, and they were to have dominion over all in regards to planet Earth. Well, that was great, Genesis 1 and 2. And then Genesis 3, of course, man sinned, and man lost that dominion. Now we not only have dominion over all the earth, as we once were given, but we can't even control our own nature apart from God. Well, in fact, it's a sad story in Genesis chapter 9, after the flood. And life starts again with Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives. Started in with 2, and now it starts in with 8 again. And God says the same thing to him, in part, to Noah. He said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. But he stopped there. He did not say, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowls of the air. Why? Because Adam blew it. Adam got involved in a crooked poker game with the devil, and he cheated him out of it. And so you can have fruitful and multiply, but we can't have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowls of the air. I'll get off on a rabbit trail here, but one of the miracles that Jesus did in Matthew 17, Matthew's the only one that talks about it, where he told Simon Peter to go down and you want to pay our tax, and well, you'll catch a fish, and that fish will have a gold coin in its mouth, and you take that and pay the taxes. And I wonder why he did that. Why didn't you just give him that? That's one of the strangest miracles. No, of the 35 miracles that Jesus did, 34 of them were done to demonstrate his deity. That was done to demonstrate his humanity. You see, he was the perfect man. He had dominion over the fish of the sea. Can you imagine He's probably 30 miles from the Sea of Galilee when he told Peter, wouldn't be that far, it'd be probably like 5 or 6 miles to go down to the Sea of Galilee. He said, hey, Charlie Tuna, swimming there, third from the top there, dive down, some 1,200 feet. The Sea of Galilee's not too deep. Actually, it's a reservoir. And there's a gold coin and a lot of Jewish beer cans there and everything. But a gold coin, some poor guys drop and make a beeline to the top and give that to Simon Peter. And see, he was demonstrating his perfect humanity. We could have done that. Now, I tie that in with the book of Hebrews where the author talks about that, but he adds to it. He said, so we see that God gave all things under man, apparently more than just the earth, maybe the whole universe. We're going to help him name the stars, etc. In fact, he said there was nothing that was not under his feet. So that little conjunction but there, it said, but now we see not all things under his feet. What an understatement. See, we blew it. And that's one of the reasons Jesus has to come again, prepare this place for us, that we might experience our lost destiny. We have been made to rule with Jesus over all eternity. So we will serve him in that capacity. A place of singing, a place of fellowship, a place of service, a place of learning. We'll learn about the power of God. I subscribe to several magazines, science magazines, and I'm absolutely just blown away the size of this universe. The latest now, it's at least 15 billion light years in all 4 directions, all 6 directions, 2 and up and down. 15 billion light years. Now, a light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. And light travels at the rate of 186,000 miles per second. And so it's absolutely incredible. And one science magazine recently said that 15 billion might be just the backyard. It could be as much as 50 billion, or it could be infinite. I don't think it's infinite. Only God is infinite. And in this gigantic universe, there are 100 billion galaxies. Ours is one, the Milky Way. And each galaxy has at least 100 billion stars. And so if you multiply 100 billion times 100 billion, you get 1 followed by 22 zeros, which is the number of the sands of the sea on all the seashores of the world. And then there's black holes, and then there's a neutron star. All is incredible. We'll understand and we'll learn about the power of God and about the Word of God. There are 1,189 chapters in the Bible. There are 31,173 verses. And a friend of mine years ago loved the Greek language, just fell in love with it. He taught here, and he went to Moody Bible Institute. He taught there for a number of years. He may still be teaching there. But while he was here, he told me he spent, before he came, he said, I took him into lunch. He said that he had a D.Phil, Doctor of Philosophy from Cambridge, I think, and he graduated from Dallas also. He went over there, and he said his dissertation was to exegete the last few verses in Hebrews chapter 5 and the first 6 or 7 verses in Hebrews chapter 6. Okay? And he said, I went over there, and I had all my classwork done, so I just had to write and report to my readers and everything. He said, sir, for 4 years, of course, we took the summer off, my wife and I, my kids, but he said, for 4 years, he said, this was my schedule. I got up at 6, I ran for a half hour, I had my devotions, I had breakfast, I helped my wife get the kids up, she had a job over there. They went to school, and about 9 o'clock, from 9 till noon, I studied those verses. And then I had a half-hour break, had a bowl of soup, a bologna sandwich, and then from 12 to 5, when they came home to school, my wife, he said, I continue. He said, Harold, I did that for 5 days a week for 9 months out of the year for 4 years. Those verses. I thought, how many times did you read them? He said, it's an amazing what the Chinese he said, it's clever, those Chinese. They've written a lot of Chinese philosophers and theologians on those verses. They're very controversial. And he said, there was 5 or 6 different languages, so I had to hire people to help me. But he said, when I finished, honestly, he said, I felt I had just scratched the surface of really those verses. And I think it totaled about 10 verses. 4 years, 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day, 31,173 verses. We'll learn about the precepts of God. And then we will learn about the plan of God, why God allowed certain things in our lives. And I've quoted this so often that probably you're tired of me quoting it, but I quote it because I need it. It said, my path, if I can find it now. Miss Eva, what's the one I send out so often about, I can't remember, though my path, anyway, it's one of the great poems that, let's see, I can't remember, but we'll learn about why God allowed certain things to happen in our life. And then we will learn about the person of God. Our theme song will be more about Jesus, would I know more of his grace to others show. And then a place of teaching. We're going to, probably the first few million years, we're going to exercise the role as a student. And we're going to learn about all creation. And we're going to learn about God when he created everything. And the angels were there in the book of Job, and they shouted for joy. And boy, you should have been there when God cleaned up on Satan. It was something to see, Well, that was before, so they will tell us. But after a while, we said, okay, you guys sit down now, close your wings. We're going to tell you, we're going to teach you something. You'll be the student, we're going to be the teacher that you know nothing about. And that is about the grace of God. They know a lot about creation. They know nothing about redemption. And a place of teaching. And then clarifications about heaven. What kind of bodies will we have? We will have spirit-controlled bodies. And I think, can't remember who did this, Donald Gray Barnhouse, I think he did it while I was at Moody. But he said, now, what is the difference? And he took a sheet and a book here. He said, what is the difference between a spiritual body and a physical body? Nothing. He said, except in the arrangement. He said, now, let us consider that this sheet of paper is the spirit, the soul, the person. And this Bible, this book, is the body. He said, down here, it looks like this. He said, the body pretty well controls the spirit. He said, how many missionaries, they support a lot of missionaries, the 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, he said, have come home and just heartbroken because their body said the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And because of old age and everything, down here, a lot of people want to do certain things, but the body says, no, you're not. The body sort of bosses. Well, up there, the same ingredients, but a little different arrangement, where the spirit will control the body. We'll have glorified bodies, and the bodies where not the body, but the spirit controls. And will we know each other in heaven? That's one of the questions that all pastors are asked. It's one of the most unnecessary questions. Why? Well, of course we'll know each other. I mean, that's the Christian hope, that we will know each other. You bury a loved one, you know you'll see that loved one again. Why on earth would people ask that question? Of course we will recognize each other. What age will it be? Not 81, I hope. I hope it's a little younger than that. I don't know. Augustine thought it was going to be around 30, but it'll be whatever age. Jesus was 33, 34, probably in that area there. Here's a question that really no one has a full answer to. What about our loved ones not in heaven? One, I'm not sure I completely go along with this, but I don't know of any other answer, is that here's a godly mother and prayed for his son, and he's not there. God may just wipe away that part, a memory from her. I don't know, but there's no tears in heaven, so he's going to do something about this. And then what will our relationship be with our loved ones in heaven? And, I don't think we'll all be robots. Now, there'll be no sex in heaven, no marriage in heaven. But I have an idea that if the rapture would take place today, that there'll be probably tens of thousands of 16-year-old young girls in heaven, but one will mean a little more to me, and that's Abigail, my granddaughter, etc., and my wife. And so I think certainly if we know each other, there will be that rapport. And what about those who die as babies? And I have a theory on that. I probably stole it from somebody else, but that God, we don't know, but God may have those little babies, for saved parents especially, to stay exactly their age until the millennium, and then place them in the care of their parents who lost them so many years ago, and allow the parents to raise that little one in the perfect environment. I think I'm suggesting God do that. I think it's a good idea. I close with this. Many years ago, my first church was in Mansfield, Ohio, the Community Bible Church. And one of the first things we did was to start a youth group. And we built it up to 30 or 40. And a young boy by the name of Steve he was 14 years old. He began to attend. His parents didn't go to church anywhere. And so one night, I think it was Friday night, we'd have, maybe it wasn't Sunday night, a youth night, Friday or Saturday. I took him home after the fellowship, and I said, Steve, I just want to tell you, I said, I just appreciate so much you coming and hope you're enjoying it. He said, oh, yeah, I really am, Pastor. And he said, here's my house. And I said, okay. I said, oh, Steve, let me ask you a question. I said, okay. I said, I'm just wondering, I don't want to be nosy, but are you saved? Do you know Christ as Savior? And I could see tears welling up in his eyes. He said, no. He said, I don't know Jesus. I said, would you like to be? Yes, I would. So we led him to Christ. Well, and he really began to grow for a couple of months. And then strange things began to happen on the way home from school. On several occasions, he was late, and they found him in a ditch. What would happen? He didn't know what would happen. He passed out. So they took him to a children's hospital there in Columbus, did a test and everything, found out he had a cancer, inoperable cancer about the size of a walnut. It was growing. And this was in July, and of course he couldn't go back to. No, this was in September. He couldn't go back to school, and they lived outside the city. His mom and dad. And his dad drove in. Didn't even have a car. He drove in with somebody else. And I told my wife, I said, I'm not going to let that kid rot out there because he only had a few months to live. So I asked his mother. I said, would it be okay if I picked Steve up every Friday? And we just sort of hung around, hung out together. And she said, oh, that'd be great. He'd really look forward to it. And so we did, and we watched the World Series that year. And I taught him how to play chess, and he got so he could beat me. And so, but I said, Steve, what would you like to do more than anything else? He said, I'd like to learn to drive, but he said, I can't take driver's license. My dad doesn't have a driving school. And he said, my dad doesn't have a car. And I said, now, Steve, we just bought 5 acres, and we're going to build this church, and the neighbors think we're crazy anyway. And I said, the ground is pretty hard. If you don't mind, I'll show you how to drive. And we'll just, in the field here. Oh, that was great. So I sit in the passenger side, and I can still see him driving. The right side of his body was paralyzed by the time, but he had a good left hand there. And so, man alive, we drove around that building and everything, and he concluded, yeah, I've learned to drive. I said, that's great. Well, so it wasn't long after that, and his mother called me on Thursday night. She said, don't come to pick him up because he's not here. I said, okay. She said, he's had another relapse, and it looks final. And he's back in the hospital, this time the Mansfield General Hospital. I said, all right. And so that morning, it was about Friday morning, about 4 in the morning, I just couldn't sleep thinking about him. So I got up and slipped out and went up to the 4th floor in the Mansfield General Hospital. And I thought, here's a kid on the 4th floor dying. And I got a kid, not his age, but I got a kid that's healthy and vivacious and everything. He was born on the second floor. So I walked in there, and a nightlight was on. He was asleep, and I didn't want to wake him. So I looked at him, and he looked like a skeleton. He looked like a survivor of Auschwitz or a death camp. And you could see the pains of and his lines in his face. And I thought to myself, Lord, that's not fair. I mean, this kid's, he suffered so much. But I had prayer for him, and I started to leave, and I'm not quite sure what happened. I think my foot hit the bed instead and made it known. He woke up. And and that was 50 plus years ago, I'll never forget, those big brown eyes open up, and I'm there. He says, "Are you Jesus?" I said, "No." I said, "Steve, I'm not." Oh, he said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Steve, don't apologize. It's the only time I've ever been, thought to be Jesus, mistaken for Jesus." And he said, "I thought you were Jesus." So we had the prayer, and I went home, and I told my wife, I said, "You probably expect a call from the hospital or from his mother. He's going to die." So he did. He died at noon. So I preached the funeral on a Tuesday, and I told that story, and I said, I have an idea. I said that he woke up twice in the last 4 or 5 days, and on both occasions, in strange places, he might not have known where he was. And both occasions, there was a figure bending over him. I said the main difference between Friday morning and Friday noon is that Friday noon, he didn't have to ask the question, "Who are you?" When my life's work is ended, friends, and we cross the swelling tide and the glory of the resurrection see, I shall know my Redeemer when I cross the other side, and his smile will be the first to welcome me. I shall know him, as redeemed by his side I shall stand. I shall know him, by the print of the nails in his hand. Let's sing, okay?